Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Charvak podcast. This is your host, Kushal Mehra. All right, so before we start today's monologue, Ityadi, let me first just greet all the members. So, Pooja, Vivek Sinha, Uncle Kumar, Ajesh Philip, Deadshot, Jamin, Shivam Aditya, V exclamation TXR3YV, Wah, Shabash, Aushik. I can't read this name because I think it's in Tamil, so I can't read it. Simple Life, Prashant, Nagulapalli, Game Guru, Red Bull, Com, Kazama, Ayyappadas, Mayur Rathod, Nachiket Sant, Arya Vishwarup, Arpit Trivedi, Shashidharan Karthikeyan, Utsav Sharma, Kumar Paurush, Keval Mangena, Vivek Verma, Ratnesh Kumar, Devbrat Doge, Devyanshi, Venkataraman, Vishwanathan Sheshadari, Abhishek Mehla, Arun Venkataraman, SR Pankaj Kumar, Dhruvadas, Shubhankar, Arun, Anand and Kirti Joshi. Thank you very much for supporting the Charvak podcast by becoming um, a member. Now, before we start the discussion, let me tell you how you can support the Charvak podcast. Well, first and foremost, I will request each and every one of you to please subscribe to this channel. It's very simple. You go to the channel and you press the subscribe button and keep the notifications bell on. So, whenever I go on a live stream, you can join in. Two, like the video. Apparently, these things help. Three, leave comments. And also, I'm all obviously the monologues are not there, but everything else, all the podcasts that I do are also available in their audio format on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcast, Stitcher, all these audio platforms. So if you are a regular listener, I would request you to go and subscribe on all those platforms too. And if you can, leave a review on iTunes. These things help the podcast, because the more you guys engage with the podcast on a digital platform, the more other people get to know about it in the recommendations. And it's very simple. You come here because you like my ideas or you hate my ideas, whatever be the reason. So if you create more traction on my podcast, that way my ideas are there. So if you hate me, maybe others who are like you, they can criticize me. And if you like me, maybe my ideas can go and reach out to other people. So these are the baselines that you can help, but there is also another level. So if you obviously want to help me, uh, you know you can become a member on Patreon or on YouTube. So there are two tiers basically. On YouTube there is the Seekers and the Speak With Me tier, and on Patreon it's basically $5 USD and below and $5 USD and above. So the Seekers and $5 USD and below, they get access to the entire book discussions that I've held. We are right now in the ninth book discussion. The theme is only one: Aryan invasion, Aryan migration, and out of India theory. So right now we are discussing The Horse, the Wheel, and Language by David Anthony. Once we're done with this book, we're going to jump right into the Rig Veda, which will be the culmination of the entirety of the nine book, 5 to 7 papers, and many other things. We'll end with the Rig Veda. And if you want to go to the next tier, well, you can either become a Speak With Me level or pledge $5 and above on Patreon. There you get the book discussion series. On top of that, you get the Valmiki Ramayana discussions. Yesterday was one of those discussions. We are right now at the Yuddha Kandam. We'll start from Sarga 105, chapter 6, next Sunday. And along with that, you also get one AMA. We just finished an AMA on the 29th of January this month. Now the next one will be on around 26th of February. I think it's a Saturday or something. That's when the next month is. So that's there. Some of you still want to support me via UPI. So if you want to support me via UPI, you can send your UPI donations according to the tiers and then email me, and I will send you the content through UPI too. Or I can add you in a Telegram group which is there for members. If you have $5 and above, I've created one Telegram group too, and you can go there. And or you can buy the Charvak podcast merch. You can buy the merchandise by going to kushalmehra.com, or you can go to kadakmerch.com under the creators tab. You can do that. Now that I've spoken all that I want to, let's do the monologue. So So, what is the monologue about today? So, obviously, first of all, I want to apologize. I had created the previous breakup by creating the universal moral framework, thinking that I would speak about decoloniality. But then they did not want to want me to live in peace, and this whole Subhash Chandra Bose thing happened. And I was like, I anyways wanted to talk about this, so I was like, this is the best opportunity for me to talk about it. So I just took the opportunity, and I was writing about this on and off in my notes or taking notes. See, so I'm not a very good writer. My skill set is more speaking, thinking, those kinds of stuff, building arguments in notes and then maybe just ratting them out. I've never been a good writer, at least in my view. I'm not. I don't know about what others think, but in my view, I'm not a good writer. So I was preparing on this, and then suddenly this thing happened. So I was like, I did my thing. I waited for like 72 hours or something, or more than 72 hours, and now that things have died down and everybody has spoken and chikna chillana ho gaya. So I thought, now I can come in and make my views on the subject. So I titled this today's monologue very specifically, right? So I titled today's monologue, how do we judge historical figures? Now here's the thing, usually what happens when I do a monologue is that I don't have notes. I just speak extempore. So there have been very few monologues where I've actually taken notes, and most of those times they ran into an hour. So I think today is going to be one of those things, because I could have spoken extempore, but I think that's not fun. So what I did was I started reading a lot of op-eds, a lot of papers, and then what happened was my focus today is going to be, so what I did was I created a word file where I took out genuine quotes from different op-eds of philosophers speaking, authors speaking, and stuff like that. I'm not going to show every link to the op-ed, but the paper that I will be reading in the end, I will. So what we'll do today is that I'm not going to defend Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. That is done by many people. So in case you don't know what the story is, Modi ji, obviously, he inaugurated a beautiful hologram of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, and it led to this weird sort of a controversy where Patanjali Vardarajan, or like he calls himself Tunku Vardarajan, and then many other people started chiming in and calling him a fascist. Then there were some South Asian expert like Myra McDonald and many other people who also came in. Edward Luce came in, and he also wrote a piece. I think I forgot the website, so please forgive me. I did read the piece, which was like coming from a certain particular point of view, and then people start, I mean, I was one of them who started debating or quote tweeting Myra McDonald, and it led to this. So I was like, I don't want to get into what was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, what was Winston Churchill, what was Mahatma Gandhi, what was Adolf Hitler, what was this, what was Jefferson, what was this character in the history. What I started thinking was that let us look at the larger picture. Look, I am notoriously known as someone who opposes selectivism or subjectivism and relativism. And in fact, this subject is a big challenge. And I will state this right now that my views are slightly vulnerable on this one. I could have avoided and made my views even stronger. But then I was like, let me expose myself to the listener, to the viewer, when I am vulnerable in my own brain, where I'm not sure about many things when it comes to this subject. So today's monologue is more of me presenting different people's arguments and quotes initially. Then what I'll do is there is this paper. So I'll share the screen here and I'll show the paper from where I've taken few notes and I'll be reading them. So this is a very interesting paper. In 2018, Charles R. Conn, he is the warden of the Rhodes House, Oxford, CEO of the Rhodes Trust and Rhodes Scholarship. This paper is titled Thinking About Historical Legacies, Looking for Just Principles and Processes. So, what I'll do is I will start with quotes, random quotes that I have been reading from different places. These will be like seeds that I have planted in your mind. These are not my views, these are just views that I have been reading. Monologues, you might say, could be, Kushal, why are they not your views? That's a fair question. But sometimes you have to share a multitude of views. I will clarify where my views are there and where my views aren't there. I'm just reading the views. Then what I'll do is I'll use this beautiful paper, because this paper has actually gone and thought about what do we do about this subject. And he has a 3-part series where he gets into the weeds of it, and he says maybe we could do this. And when I read the paper, you might find a lot of overlapping from the quotes I've read initially, but I want that to happen. And this is not going to be 30 minutes. This will take time. So if you don't have patience, I can't help you. And all your questions, I will answer them. So usually what happens is I speak for half an hour, and then we have this 1 hour Q&A where we do, you know, where you guys ask your super chats or UPIs and I answer them. We will do that. So today's monologue, instead of being an hour and a half, will go to 2 hours. Obviously, it depends. If I don't get any interesting questions, I'll just wrap it up with my views. But it usually ends up happening that people do ask questions. So I'm assuming people will ask me questions. That's my underlying assumption. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, and I'm cool with it. But having said all of this, and I'm sorry, I've taken 11 minutes already blabbering here, but um, it's very important that you guys get a panoply of views. You get a more holistic perspective. And then wherever you fall on the spectrum, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you fall on the spectrum. So now let's get into this. So the first point I want to talk about today, right? Before I read those quotes, is I want to first touch upon a subject which is how do we judge historical characters, right? That is a very important subject. So usually what happens is when we judge historical characters, right, there are two views in anthropology or historiography. So these are the two views. So one is the emic, the inside view, and one is the etic, the outside view. I hope you guys can see the screen. I have purposely shown the screen here because I don't want to hide anything, so that you know the source, you know everything. कोई मैंने ये चीजें नहीं बनाई हैं. But my point is, see, my point is to read scholarship, learn scholarship, present it to you guys. Some people do it in the form of essay writing or book writing. I do it in the form of podcasting. Now you can judge me for what is what it is. Now let us. So it is very important that you know what an emic view is and what an etic view is. So I'll read from the screen because I know the screen is a slightly blurry. So it's a very interesting thing, right? So this is the definition, assumptions, and goals. So what is an emic or inside view? It is a behavior described as seen from the perspective of cultural insiders. In it constructs drawn from their self understandings, while uh, you know what is an etic or an outside view. An etic or outside view is behavior described from the vantage external to the culture in constructs that apply equally well to other cultures. So let us take, say, Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose as an example. So in the case of Netaji, our view of Netaji would be considered to be an emic view, and the view of other people might be considered an etic view. So let's say, for example, Edward Luce and Myra McDonald might be the etic view, and views of scholars in India might be the emic view, just for example. Then the next one, defining assumptions and goals mein hai in the emic, is describe the cultural system as a working whole, while in the etic view they describe the ways in which cultural variables fit into general causal models of a particular behavior. So what they're trying to say is the emic view would be like, this is my culture and this is how the whole thing churns out from my cultural perspective. And in the etic view, it's basically they have a standard model, and that model is used to judge everyone, is what they're trying to say. Now I'll talk about the pitfalls of both the emic view and the etic view later on. For first, let me explain this. So typical features of methods associated with this view. So in the emic view, observations recorded in a rich qualitative form that avoids imposition of the researcher's constructs, long-standing, wide-ranging observation of one setting or a few settings. This is what happens in the emic view. In the etic view, focus on external measurable features that can be assessed by parallel procedures at different cultural sites, brief, narrow observation of more than one setting, often a large number of settings, right? And the final is examples of a typical study. So in a emic, your typical study would be ethnographic fieldwork, participant observation, along with interviews, content analysis of text, providing a window into indigenous thinking about justice. In the etic view, it would be multi-setting survey, cross-sectional comparison of responses to instruments measuring justice perceptions and related variables, comparative experiment treating culture as a quasi-experimental manipulation to assess whether the impact of particular factors varies across cultures. Now I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm going to tell you where the problem lies in both the cases. Now, the emic view and etic view as a very rigid method can be dangerous at times. So I'll give you an example. Recently, I think it was I forgot the name. The blog is Why Evolution is True. I never remember this great evolutionary biologist's name. So apologies to him. I always forget his name. But the blog's name is Why Evolution is True. So I read a very interesting news report, from New Zealand, where recently they said indigenous sciences, yes, should be treated on equal footing, or should be treated shared as the same as regular science. And where they were coming from is exactly this emic viewpoint of view. We have our own this, we have our own that, and ye wo. Another example could be creationism in the classroom. Republican states have always tried to push creationism over evolution, right? So this is where the emic view fails. The truth is the truth. Evolution is real. You may not like it, it is. Teach that, is my whole point. That's where the emic view can have its own pitfalls. Now, what about the etic view? Whether we like it or not, there is some Eurocentrism sometimes in the etic view. Who has pointed that out? Yes, post colonial scholarship has done it, decolonial scholarship has also done it. But even before they did it, others have also done it. It is not rocket science to find that out. So sometimes what happens is the etic view, or the person trying to build an etic view, sometimes does not look at their own preconceived cultural notions or biases in the modeling itself. Their model could have those problems. So when they create that model, it runs into major problem. So those could be the possible pitfalls in the etic view also. It Now you will come back to me and say, Kushal, where do you fall? I'll be very open. I usually fall partially on the etic view side. I do not believe that societies have to be looked either in the etic or the emic way. I believe in a refined etic way of looking at things. I believe I can look at the West as an outsider and pass judgments on them. I can. And they similarly can pass judgments on me. The point is that judgments have to be based on holistic, robust, factual measures, which was not the case in the case of Subhash Chandra Bose, is my whole point. So if your defense of Subhash Chandra Bose is like, you are white and you can't comment, then it's a rubbish view. Or if somebody comes to me is, you are Indian, why are you commenting on Churchill? You are an idiot. No, that is not where I am coming from. So now that we have established this whole emic view, etic view, and what is the potential pitfall in both the emic and the etic, now we come to our larger subject, that how do we judge historical figures when we have this emic and etic problem, where both the methodologies, if used rigidly, can create pitfalls. There are genuine pitfalls in both the methodologies when we are looking. But does that mean we cannot judge historical figures universally? I don't think so. We can. So now I'm going to get into the next part, where I tell you guys, just wait, let me open my Word file, where I tell you guys, I'll read some random thoughts, right? I'll read random thoughts now, and I'll make you think. Now, whether you agree with them, disagree with them, whether they trigger you, whether they, it is a microaggression or not, I'm just going to read things to you. Now, the next 40 minutes is going to be me reading thoughts, taking breaks, trying to tell you what is this person trying to say, trying to put it in examples and forms like that. And then what we should do at the end of today's discussion is, you can ask questions obviously, but what you should do is then sit down comfortably overnight, maybe And then ask yourselves, how do I judge historical characters? If I am able to make you judge historical characters that way, I think I have done my job. Other than that, I am not interested in anything else, is my whole point. Okay, so while I was going through, one particular thing that I read in an op-ed, it were the comments of a philosopher, Miranda Fricker. So, so Miranda is not a moral relativist, by the way, right? But, and I'm going to read the quote from the article. They say she thinks the test of blameworthiness is like, Netaji being called a fascist, Churchill being called a mass murderer. It's from that point of view. So the test for blameworthiness is whether the person could have known any different. What does that mean? So in quote, she says, the proper standards by which to judge people are the best standards that were available to them at that time. It's unfair to blame people for failing to be moral pioneers, she says. The attitude of blame presupposes that the person was in a position to have done better. So do you understand what she's trying to say? So what she's trying to say is that if, for example, we we call X historical figure a homophobe, for example. I'm just giving you an example. Did what? So the points we need to consider when we call them a homophobe. What was the larger societal raison d'etre, or the essence of that society? What were most people like 95%, 96%, 97% people like at that time? Point number one. Were they all homophobic? So if they were all homophobic, so were these people just your regular people who just didn't know better? Is that something we need to consider? Or people did know that homophobia is bad, it was getting discussions, and then in spite of having robust arguments available like we have today, and if you're still a homophobe, then how do we judge? So let's say a homophobe in 1920 and a homophobe in 2022, are they the same in terms of a moral standing? That is the point she's trying to say. What the point is that a 1900s or a 1800s homophobe is not on the scale of being problematic as a 2022 homophobe is, because we just have way too much more information today than those folks had in 1900s, early 1900s, or let's say 1800s or 1700s. My audio cracking? Am I audible now? Am I audible now? Is it fine? Everybody, the mic and reconnect it. How is this now? Am I audible now? Okay, it must be a video issue. I don't know. Okay, fine. It must be a loose connection or something of that sort. Okay, I'll start now. Let me check the settings again. Yep, it seems okay. All right. Okay, now let's read the next verse. Okay. So then there was another very interesting point that I came across in my reading. Again, I'm going to read this. So somebody says, but if we can't blame people for abhorrent views, does that also mean we can't hold them responsible for these views? So do you understand what they're saying? So, okay, I get personality one, personality two, you know, uh, did not know better. But does that mean we don't judge their views? Is the point. So they give a very interesting example, and let me read it. So Immanuel Kant, for example, a famous philosopher, he was in the 18th century. you know he was, I don't know how many of you know, by the way, his attitudes were quite different on homosexuality. So let's say, I'll read this. Influenced by ancient philosophy, the 20th century British philosopher Bernard Williams tried to tease apart a distinction between blame and responsibility. Right? He did so by writing about what he called, in quotes, moral luck. Take the following example. Imagine that while a lorry driver is on the road, a child suddenly runs out in front of him. Through tragic bad luck, the child is hit by the vehicle and dies. The man is blameless, for the accident has happened through no fault of his. In this sense, he has nothing to reproach himself for and has done nothing wrong. And yet, Williams writes, surely this man is now enmeshed in a set of moral responsibilities that, for example, a bystander who is equally blameless is not. It makes a moral difference that it was him at the wheel. As the driver, he might have an obligation to meet the parents or attend the funeral, obligations not incurred by a bystander. This is one kind of moral luck or moral unluck. So, what moral unluck is, that while, yes, you were just driving and, you know, and suddenly somebody comes in front of you and it was not your fault, the video is crystal clear, you've been, given that go, but you have to live with that reality yourself as a person, right? So, that's what they're trying to say, is they call that moral unluck. So, I'll read further. Another kind of bad moral luck is being born at a time when you need to be a moral genius to see that a certain view or practice is wrong, because all around you, you are people who accept that the practice is all right. Says Fricker, is another philosopher. I'm taking you back to the 1800s where everybody was homophobe by and large. So you really needed to be a genius to think that this is wrong. These issues of blame and responsibility are relevant for reflecting on how we make amends for historic moral mistakes. For years, for example, the Australian government, if you guys remember, they refused to apologize for, the things they did to indigenous peoples, but eventually they did. So again, the discussion, what these people are trying to say is that sometimes ancient people or people from our past are just born in a different era, and we should be very careful when they judge them. But again, I want to take you back again to the same question. If we can't blame people for their abhorrent views, does it also mean that we can't hold them responsible for these views? Again, go back to that. That is the whole point. So let me read further. There was another interesting quote. Historians should do their utmost to encourage people to judge the past by today's morals, but only on certain principles, in some cases even Leninist principles, that things must get much worse before they get better. Presentism is so widespread. Presentism basically is the habit of human beings to judge the past by their current standards. That is called presentism in these things. It's so widespread that it can be easily made to be looking respectable. So the whole thing, what the person over here is trying to say, is that we should be very careful of presentism. Now, in my personal views, we can't. I think we are always going to be presentists, in my personal view. So these are my personal views. This is not the quote of the author. So uh, what I'm trying to say here is that no matter how much we try to avoid these things, we are always going to have some level of presentism. So to say that you can avoid presentism is rubbish. You can never avoid presentism. Some level of presentism is always going to be there. No matter what you do, some level of presentism is always going to be there. So this whole, presentism debate honestly does not stand for me, at least on my personal level. So now let's read another bit. Okay. So this is bit from another essay that I read. So the author says, our present knowledge comes at the heels of wisdom gathered by generations before us. It is accumulated over time and by that standard should be richer, informed by greater experience and examination. Yet, Is it fair to say that a person living 150 years ago should not have had the attitude shared by most people of his or her time, who only knew what they could know by that point of history? The intelligence of societies grows not only intellectually, reshaping their governments, but emotionally. It has taken the world a while to grow in that regard, to become mature in empathy, and it's obviously nowhere near where it should be in such evolution, as it is biased to judge a person from a different era for not having the moral foresight to stand up to his or her peers and end the tyranny of injustice. That is also no excuse to celebrate attitudes and statements that go squarely against what we believe in now. That is the key part. A bad idea is like a virus. It can take hold and come back quickly, infecting millions. We have all seen that happen all too often. This is the important point. This was a beautiful line that this person wrote, that yes, okay, you know, okay, Aurangzeb had some terrible ideas. Oh, we should not judge him by today's standards. I'm not saying I don't. I'm just saying I'm giving a hypothetical to you, right? But he had batshit crazy views, didn't he? Aurangzeb, by any standard, was a batshit crazy bigot. So, what I'm trying to say is, when folks like Lady Teja try to mm, create this nuance in quotes around Aurangzeb, she is doing the biggest disservice to these generations by normalizing the views of an batshit crazy person. That's my whole point. Siddhant, I've seen your super chat has popped up. I'll take it on later on, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. You can ask all your super chats now. I'm collecting them in a separate page and I will take them later. I just want to finish my thoughts first. I also have a UPI from someone. I think I don't know what their name was. Yeah, some Banerjee, I think. I don't know. I've not seen their question. So again, to go back to this point is very important. People often confuse themselves where they say, "Oh, we should not, you know, judge them." And this applies to Netaji, Gandhi, Nehru, Churchill, everyone. See, Hitler just made things so simple. He was just pure evil. Aurangzeb, in my view, is like Hitler, pure evil. Pure evil. So, Hitler is very easy to judge. Churchill isn't. Yeah, you may not like what I'm saying. Churchill isn't, because there is a genuine case for Churchill where he did defeat or whatever he did. Now you can say, oh, they had to do it. Yeah, they had to do it means, but they still did it, right? And we don't know the historical, results of what if Hitler had won and what if the world would have gone. I'm not saying. Doesn't mean Churchill is better than Netaji in my eyes. Netaji is a great, 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 great personality. I don't put Churchill with Hitler, but if you do put Churchill with Hitler, I don't like Churchill. I hate him, by the way, but I hate Hitler far more. Is my whole point. I am not a Churchill fan, but I see the case when a Britisher makes it. I get it. With Hitler, there is no case. With Aurangzeb, there is no case. And people like Audrey, what are they doing is exactly what this line says. Audrey has no excuse to celebrate attitudes and statements that go squarely against what we believe in now. And Aurangzeb is a bad idea, which is exactly like a virus. And it can take hold and come back quickly, infecting millions. And we know it can. This is where Audrey is wrong. This is where she is completely wrong. She has no sense. She is nonsense. That's my whole point. Anyways, let me read further. Now, another thing. So recently, Harsh actually shared a very interesting idea. Uh, article Harsh had shared. I mean, Harsh Madhusudan Gupta. So, very interesting, right? So, I'm not going to read the whole article. So, just sharing it. So, this article on Vox, which was written in 2015, says Woodrow Wilson was extremely racist even by the standards of his time. It talks about, you know, his views, etc., etc., etc. What we, um, So Wilson in 1912 election, before being disenchanted by his segregation policies, wrote of one colored clerk who could not actually be segregated on account of the nature of his work and who consequently had a cage built around him to separate him from his white companions for many years. That's right, black people who couldn't logistically be segregated were put in literal cages. I'm just sharing one for example. But I also tried to read different essays, right? So this whole Woodrow Wilson controversy, this is a paragraph two. Uh, I have no view on this. Honestly, I have not studied Woodrow Wilson. I'm just sharing both the sides. So this paragraph said the statue was not erected to support, to celebrate his support of slavery. It was to recognize his contributions to the university. By studying his entire legacy, we can better understand the values and ideas that shaped historical events and time periods, and we can apply this insight to the present. If we try to change history into what we wish it were, we will misconstrue it in a way that undermines the university's commitment to seek truth. So again, I'm just trying to create, and this is another character, Woodrow Wilson. उसकी कुछ तो उसकी यूनिवर्सिटी है, उसका नाम हटाने का कोई चक्कर चालू था, आई डोंट नो. So I'm just sharing. I'm trying to share examples so that you can think. I'm not going to give you any holistic views on Netaji etc. मेरा काम नहीं है वो. आप यू नो अनुज को पढ़ लो, अनुज धार को, और दूसरे भी चंद्रचूड़ बोस हैं और बहुत लोग हैं, उनको आप पढ़ लो. मुझे पढ़ने की क्या जरूरत है? मैं कोई ट्रेंड हिस्टोरियन हूं नहीं. आप उनको पढ़ लो. My job through this is, how do you look at it? That's all I'm trying to tell you. How do you look at it? Right. Now I'm going to read a slightly long bit, but this was also interesting. I think this was a very far left view, but it's very interesting from a person who was looking at racism. So I'll read it. In any conversation about history, online or face to face, you'll probably hear someone offer up the advice you have to judge people by the standards of their time. This sentiment is often used to push back against people, including academic historians, who say that someone in the past did a bad thing or participated in a bad system. The criticism often ramps up from the point saying it's unfair, even wrong, to make moral judgments about the choices people made in the past. First of all, why? Right? It's a very legitimate question. Why is it so wrong to make judgments about people in the past? Especially if another historical cliche. This is very interesting. It's a very interesting point. Those who do not learn history are condemned to repeat it. Isn't it true? Like, don't judge people for what they did in the past. And if you don't learn from what you did in the past, you're condemned to repeat it. So you are judging them, right? In a way. So to say that you should not judge people in the past and, oh, don't fall into presentism is just a load of rubbish. Like I said just before this, we are all doing this whole presentism game. Every time we say XYZ in the past was awesome. Awesome in what parameters? You're judging him on some basis, right? And what are those bases? Present. You take your present thing and you put them in the past. It's all that you do every time. So it doesn't matter to say, oh, why do we do it? Why do we judge this? Why do we judge that? It's all rubbish. Looking to the past for examples of things that we think were wrong or right, good or bad, is one of the reasons people engage with history, both as lay people and as professionals. Not all historical inquiry is explicitly about judgment, and not all historical judgments are good and bad, but neither are these things outside the boundaries of historical practice. I agree. Some discomfort with the idea of judgment seems rooted in the notion that judging the goodness of someone else's choices is somehow unfair, especially if it's lacking in understanding. But historical judgment isn't inherently knee jerk or ill informed. Instead, it can be, and most of us would say it should be, about learning, understanding, and assessing. That's what most of us who practice and teach history try to do. And that includes pushing back on particular kinds of judgment. One judgment, the author says, that really bothers me is the rush to conclude that people in the past were stupid or didn't have reasons for doing what they did. Doing the work to understand the world in which people operated is the necessary precursor to assessing the choices they made and didn't make. Though the circumstances and reason behind the choice might not be apparent to you upon first glance, people in the past had reasons for doing what they did. Once you work to understand those reasons, you still don't have to agree with the choices. You might even think they were really bad choices, but you may have different understanding of them, and that can be important in talk or in taking something useful from what you have learned in the past. So I think these views are completely rational. You know, the whole point is that we always judge people. We're always going to judge people. There is not one instance in our life where we don't judge people. Judging people is second nature to us. To say we're not going to judge people is just a load of rubbish. In fact, if we don't judge people, how are we going to improve? And these are my views. It's just interesting that somebody has written this. But what the hell? I mean, I believe people today, even if they had the benefit of learning from the mistakes of the people in the past, it still doesn't change the right that we are far more morally superior to in most parameters than people in the past. We just are. Whether you like it or not, we are. And to say, oh, we should not be unfair to them is just a load of rubbish. They were them, we are better than them, and the ones in the future will be better than us, by the way, because they will learn from our mistakes. That's the cycle of life. We will go on like that. Now, obviously, there are other points. So, again, a pushback to this kind of thinking, again, because I want you guys to have a holistic view, are like, okay, I want to read this bit then. So, this is a philosopher who had written this. As a philosopher, I believe we have two ethical questions. One is the question of moral responsibility for an action at the time it occurred. The second is moral responsibility in the present time for the actions of the past. So, one is what happened in the past, and one is who is responsible for the same thing today, right? It's after effects. Most philosophers seem to think that the two cannot be separated. In other words, moral responsibility for an action once committed is set in stone. Now, this philosopher says, I argue that there are reasons to think that moral responsibility can actually change over time, but only under certain conditions. Then he talks about responsibility and change. Some philosophers are beginning to question the assumption that responsibility for actions in the past is just a question of personal identity. Philosopher David Shoemaker, for example, argues that responsibility doesn't require identity. In a recent paper in the Journal of the American Philosophical Association, my co author Benjamin Matheson and I argue that the fact that one has committed a wrong action in the past isn't enough to guarantee responsibility in the present. Instead, that responsibility depends on whether the person has changed in morally important ways. For example, let's say you held some racist views in the past, but then with the change of time, you changed as a person. So, should you be held responsible or not? I think no, you changed. Philosophers generally agree that people deserve blame for an action only if the action was performed with a certain state of mind, say an intention to knowingly commit a crime. My co author and I argue that deserving blame in the present for an action in the past depends on whether those same states of mind persist in that person. For example, does the person still have the beliefs, intentions, and personality traits that led to the past act in the first place? If so, the person hasn't changed in relevant ways and will continue to deserve blame for the past action. But a person who has changed may not be deserving the blame over time. Then, how do we judge past misconduct? If this is right, then figuring out whether a person deserves blame for a past action is more complex than simply determining if that individual did in fact commit the past action. What I would argue is that when confronted with the issue of moral responsibility for actions long since past, we need not only consider the nature of the past transgression, but also how far and how deeply the individual has changed. Now we get into the Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose thing. Think about it. Let me repeat this line for you. We need to not only consider the nature of the past transgression, but also how far and how deeply the individual has changed. Now, two individuals, Churchill and Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. How do we judge Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose if this is the argument that we use? I think Netaji is squeaky clean, but is Churchill squeaky clean? I don't think so. But if you were a Britisher, how would they say? they would come back to you and say, but look, he got the allied forces, and he got this, he got that, and he defeated Hitler, and he did this for the world, he did for the world. If Hitler would have ruled, the world would have gone to this trajectory, because the certain West ruled the world, it has gone to this trajectory. Point taken. But the point is, what do we do in the case of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose? I think it's crystal clear. This is why I say I don't need to give historical facts to defend Netaji. First, I need to give philosophical arguments to defend Netaji. The problem with our side is it does not know how to give philosophical arguments because they don't believe philosophy is something to be taken seriously. But then it is what it is. What do I do? People are the way they are. I can't change them. Right? Now, let's get into the paper. So, the paper is very interesting. The paper is something that really fascinated me. Again, this is the paper, Thinking About Historical Legacies, Looking for Just Principles and Processes. So what I have done till now was, before I shared this paper, was I gave you different perspectives, different areas, different angles, different quotes from different people. I have given you at least 7 or 8 quotes from different people from different essays. Don't ask me for those quotes. I'm not going to go and share the links. You can listen to my words, Google them, get them out. These are random things that I looked in the last 3-4 years. I have been reading on this subject because a lot of it was blowing up in America, basically. And I was just reading consistently on this subject because, like I said, moral philosophy is my subject, and I always look at subjects where moral and ethical issues arise. It's just out of interest. And it coincidentally happened that the whole Netaji thing happened, and I was like, lottery lag gayi meri, kind of a thing. So I've made some highlights here. So what this paper is basically, it was written June 2018, Charles R. Khan. So this guy actually gets into the whole detail of how do we develop. So I'm just going to read some highlights of this paper. So to begin, he says, to be clear, this paper does not look at the underlying modern arguments against racism, slavery, misogyny, and other ethical shortcomings of past actors, which are well enumerated, but rather at how we ought to assess and ultimately regard historical individuals and their portraits, statues, and other vestiges of their time. So, what is he trying to say is that he's not making a moral judgment on how X value is done, how Y. What he's saying is, how do we go about judging people itself? How do we do that? I mean, how do we go about doing it? This paper deals with the process itself. It's a fascinating paper, by the way. The process is what this guy talks about, which was very impressive in my view. So he basically has divided this into 3 parts. So part one is something that he calls evaluating legacies. So he says over here, there are those who advocate absolutist perspectives on both sides of this question. Some will argue that every physical vestige of individuals whose values or acts we find at any moral fault should be effaced or removed. Others will argue that history is history and that every artifact left behind should be studied, not altered. But given the scale of historical artifacts associated with contested individuals, it seems essential that we develop principles to parse history and make pragmatic decisions about individual legacies. So, what he's trying to say here is that when we assess historical figures, historical subjects, historical discussions, we need to have a case by case basis. We cannot have a robust thing where, okay, bad guy dumped, good guy gun. No, we have to look at the entire thing, and we create a system, and then we put all the data in that system, and once that data is put in, and then it comes out, and then what comes out of that, and then we make a decision based on that. For example, we found out मोहम्मद अली जिन्ना सर्कल का वो जो हुआ था अभी 26 जनवरी को. Now, so should there be a Muhammad Ali Jinnah circle? If yes, in what form should there be a Muhammad Ali Jinnah circle? If not, why should it be removed? What are the reasons? What are the pros? What are the cons? That's what he's trying to say here. Okay, let's read further. So then he gets into multiple points here. So I'm going to read all of them. So So he says, what are the principles, frameworks, moral mechanisms we use to make these evaluative decisions, right? So first he says is thinking versus acting. Most historical characters had beliefs that reflect different values from those we hold today. Expressing the belief that slavery is appropriate is different from owning slaves. But wrong thought can encourage actual harm, and the role of the historical individual in promoting bad ideas may matter relative to passive, morally defective beliefs. How much moral weight should be assigned to the distinction between thinking on saying on the one hand and acting on the other? So, for example, you can take Jefferson as a classic example. Eventually, he was having doubts on slavery as a concept, but he still owned slave. Or in Gandhiji's case, Gandhiji, when he was in South Africa, had clearly very racist views. He changed them later on. But the point is, how do we judge them? The second point he says is ongoing harm or benefit. Simply put, in most assessments, it seems to matter how long ago the characters lived and when their offending beliefs and behaviors occurred. Then he says, part of under the underlying mechanism here is that it is difficult to identify those harmed as well as the particular descendants of affected, oppressed or wronged groups. In addition, both the harm experienced by the victims and the benefit derived from the perpetrators is not ongoing. Where can we identify victims and where harm or unfair benefit is ongoing or has lasting effects, such as those affected by Nazi actions? Our judgments are sharper. Now, here you can immediately intervene and tell me, Kushal, Churchill is a classic case of that for Indians. And I would say I 100% agree with you. But this is why we need to read papers like this, where we can present our arguments to the same people who write these things and defend Churchill using their own lines, using their own logic, using their own epistemology. Now, I could have easily become Ashana and read these views in different words and not attributed them to the author, but I'm not like that. I have put this paper up in the open and I'm reading directly from it so that you guys know that this is a beautifully written paper by someone else and I'm just reading it out and I'm trying to share more information with you. That's all I'm doing. It doesn't mean I can't think of these things, but it's better somebody else has done it. मैं क्यों मगजमारी करूं? Now, there is another one. Contemporary values context, the author says. We appear to assess more harshly those actors whose values or behaviors were more out of step with prevailing values of the historical period. The idea of concurrent moral contestability means we appear likely to judge a slave owner in 1600 as less morally culpable than one who owned slaves after abolitionist arguments began to be commonly circulated. This is what we mean when we say he was a man of his times, even when we think those beliefs are wrong. Now, you remember I had used the homosexuality thing, that if you're a homophobe in 1800s, 1900s, and you're a homophobe in 2022, there is a whole new difference. But also remember the rebuttal to this, which I had read a while ago. Now, it should be said that the prevailing values context is normally that of powerful and typically omits the values framework of the oppressed social groups themselves, but it still seems to be at play in our judgments. So, in this case, classic moral conundrum for Indians would be the Bhima Koregaon thing. There is a certain, caste divide in that, right? Now, Bhima Koregaon, there are certain castes who oppose that in Maharashtra, and there are certain castes who support that in Maharashtra, the celebration of that. Now, that's a classic case where we can look at it from an oppressed person's narrative. This particular line. What I'm trying to tell you is that why am I using examples which are contemporary to our society? Is that so that it registers better in your brain, because these contemporary issues in our society, which is why I'm sharing it in this particular way. All right, let's read further. He then says absolute scale and type of harm. Perhaps uncontroversially, absolute scale of harm matters, as does the nature of the acts. We put genocide and enslavement in a different category than perpetuation of inequitable economic systems. For example, though the latter may affect more people, there is lots of room for disagreement amongst different value sets here. Is racism different and morally worse than other kinds of oppression based on ethnicity or religion? Where in the list do we place sexism or misogyny, homo or transphobia? Are intersectionally bad values redundant, additive? or multiplicative in our assessments. We will get different answers depending on what frameworks, deontological, consequentialist, virtuosic, etc., we employ. So what is the person trying to say here is that how do we judge this, right? So imagine a Myra McDonald saying Churchill is fine, he was just an imperialist, but Netaji, oh my god, he supported Hitler, he shook hands with Hitler. Netaji didn't kill a single soul. Churchill actually was the responsible for the death of more than millions of Indians, and still she had the nerve to support Netaji. And now you read this paragraph and you think Churchill, Netaji, and you just go bang your head in the wall, obviously, like I would. But again, why did I use an example? Is you read the highlighted portion and then you think चर्चिल कहाँ बैठता है मृत्युओं के उसमें, नेताजी कहाँ बैठते हैं. And the latter part is also very important. You know, like what kind of points? Like, so is racism getting 3 points in bad guy? Homophobia getting 2 points in bad guy? I mean, how are we going to create? And that's why he says, deontological framework will be different, consequentialist will be different. So even if we try to give marks to these things, bad habits, we are going to end up giving different marks depending on which, like if I come from my framework, which is an anekantwad framework, how will I mark these things in the good or bad scale? So even when we create a model to judge these things, the modeling is going to be different. A deontological model will be different from a consequentialist model. An ekantwadik model will be different from their model, is what this point is. That's the main aim. Next, the author talks about moral balancing. Humans appear to apply a kind of moral calculus in assessing historical legacies in which bad acts are balanced with good ones. This behavior is hardly surprising, but is ethically strange, as if morally repugnant behavior can be partly washed or absolved with good acts. Classic case, guess who? Winston Churchill. What is the defense every time you hear for Winston Churchill? Think about it. Whenever we point out deaths in the Bengal famine, they say he defeated Hitler. Hitler killed millions of people. He would have killed more people. He saved lives. So he killed more people here, does not matter, but he defeated Hitler matters. Allah, he's awesome. This is the whole point. Now we go into the next point, level of association. It is easier to disassociate via renaming or other action from individuals whose association with the institution in question was smaller than those who were founders or fundamental in shaping of the institution. Classic case of Netaji. Netaji just met Hitler and shook hands with him, and the whole world has associated with him. The guilt by association is the worst kind of accusation you can ever do. This is like I went to a seminar where there was a renowned casteist or a renowned Hindu hater, and I become a Hindu hater or a renowned casteist because I shook hands with him or I've shared the podium with him. This is the guilt by association problem. All right, let's go further. Hierarchy of evaluative principles. This is a beautifully written paper, I have to say that. If these are some of the intuitive moral principles we apply in evaluating individual cases, is there an order or hierarchy in which we can apply them? Do we first judge the type of offense, such as a belief or act, then weigh the absolute scale of moral failure, then assess our ability to identify victims and ongoing harm or benefit, then judge whether the views or acts were concurrently morally contested in their historical context, and then finally appraise the whole person with a lens of moral balancing or relative legacy? Presumably the order matters. Now what is the order, right? So now we go into part 2, which is taking action tools for navigating legacies. So then he starts with contextualizing and placarding. He says it is an approach that leaves artifacts of historical characters in place, but explains or contextualizes their role in offensive acts or values. There is a difference between honoring versus recognizing, acknowledging. Some historical artifacts offend more than others, especially those that seem to convey a sense of honor rather than those that merely acknowledge association. Now, the left is going to use this to justify Jinnah and many other characters, and we are going to oppose that, right? That's the whole point. That's my whole point. Let's go further. Balancing is an approach that brings into the physical or electronic space the faces and voices of others, including those from the oppressed or wrong groups. It can be combined with contextualizing. Remember, uh, subaltern histories might vary sometimes from the native. The subaltern histories in the case of India, maybe from certain mainstream histories, or in the case of America, indigenous histories might sometimes vary from the Western Eurocentric history. And how do we balance that? Is the point. Relocating is the idea of creating historical sculpture parks or moving objects to a museum setting. This doesn't matter for us. Reshaping or editing is an approach taken with a number of artifacts in Europe. Again, we don't care. Renaming, this is something that matters with India. We need to explore how level of association of the historical actor with the institution in question affects the employment of these options. So obviously in India, we are having this whole thing about renaming a lot of places. So think about it. So should we rename the Jinnah Road, etc., etc., that kind of a stuff? These are reparations or restorative justice. India has already dealt with that, so I don't need to get into that. Now the third part is the decision making processes. So who decides? Whose value prevail when assessing the nature and scale of wrong acts? Community processes make sense, but how do we trade off the benefits of local municipal engagement relative to national and regional processes with common principles? So how do we create a moral framework which is universal, where we we basically judge a larger set? Should questions of this nature be put to a vote of those associated with the institution? Should alumni of institution be included in the vote? So even if we are judging, so when Netaji is judged, only the Indian allowed to vote, or outsiders are also allowed to vote? The Emic Etic problem. Or in the case of Churchill, are only Britishers allowed to speak, or only Eurocentric views are allowed, or colonized people's views are also allowed? That kind of a thing. What weight or respect do we give to past members of the institutions, including those who made naming or portrait or statue decisions? Do their beliefs or value matters? Obviously he's talking about statues that are being removed in America, but I want you to think um, from the Netaji Churchill problem, right? Do current members of groups most clearly historically oppressed have their votes or input weighed more heavily, or as some have suggested, should any differential weighting be affected by the type of institution in which decision? See, this is the problem. Like I told you, the New Zealand problem, right? Now, because indigenous people were colonized, so now indigenous sciences have been taught. No, those are clearly inferior. But do folk tales of indigenous people not get a say? No, they get a say. So it's a issue based problem. Sometimes X matters, sometimes Y matters. That's the whole thing, is what I'm trying to say. Is membership in an identity group sufficient to participate, or is lived or remembered experience required to qualify the participants or judges? Or does it require additional evidence and moral arguments? What counts as evidence in these cases? Could parallels in the court system help us answer these questions? So how do we even say how one person is qualified or not? That is the thing. Does documented harm have to be demonstrated to initiate a process, or just wrong action thought? What counts as harm and how is it determined? Now, in many cases, right, these are just folk tales. We don't have any evidence. We are just folk tales. So, do we consider folk tales or not? It's a problem of how do we create a structure. Does delaying a decision perpetuate the original wrong, or has sometimes been claimed? Is this on a scale of the original moral failure? Another point. Does the purpose of the institution facing a legacy question matter? For example, might the purpose of a learning institution lead to different decision than that faced by a municipality? Now I'll stop the page. Now, what I think this paper did was, this paper has not given you many answers, but what this paper has done is asked all the relevant questions that need to be asked when you model something like this. Modeling is very important, because if you ask me, there while there is an emic view, there is an etic view. Eventually, I refuse to believe that characters cannot be judged at a universal holistic way at all. And if we want to judge human beings or characters in a universal holistic way, we need to create a robust framework of judging personalities over time.
Because if we don't do that, then in India we will always have these absurd kinds of situations where, wait till the day you will also have things like, oh, falana person freedom fighter was upper caste, so he by default is bad. No. So because how far do we go down the oppressed route, and how far down the road do we take this oppressor oppressed mindset when we judge characters all the time? This paper does. These characters do have these things do have value, but how much of a value do they have? Now when you read all the views of Bal Gangadhar Tilak, sometimes those views might jar you. You read the views of Mahatma Gandhi, some of his views might jar you. How are we going to judge these people is the most important thing. What my monologue today has done is not given you a very clear view, but what my monologue today has done is given you a panoply of answers, a panoply of questions, and a panoply of options. What you should be doing is you should be thinking every time when there is a historical character being discussed. I would say even religious granths, prophets, devas, devis, everybody. I think nobody is off limits. But that's my view. You may not. And that's fine. It's a free world. But there has to be some kind of a framework that we need to apply when we create this system, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm sure we can do that. It is very tough. It is going to take a lot of effort. It is going to take a lot of people to come together. But we can do it, is my whole point. So when we, when you look at Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, when you look at Winston Churchill, Netaji to me is not tough. Churchill is. And I still repeat, I get the Britishers' point of view. And I'm not going to rubbish it. I get their view, I'm not going to rubbish it. With Hitler, it's a clear case, right? Hitler is the black and white where we can say pure, unadulterated evil. Aurangzeb, for me, again, from the Indian perspective, is the black and white case where, it is pure, unadulterated evil. Gandhi is complex. And Gandhi compared to whom is complex, right? So if you compare Gandhi to Ambedkar, okay, what were Ambedkar's views on this? What were Ambedkar's views on that? What were Gandhi's views on? Gandhi was clearly anti-vax. Gandhi was anti-modernity. Uh, Ambedkar had different views on certain things. On the issue of annihilation of caste, I think Savarkar's views on annihilation of caste were far superior than Ambedkar's till that extent. Even more, I think. And Savarkar though wanted to nuke the whole system. I don't think so. Ambedkar wanted to nuke it. Uh, so there are multiple things. My whole point is that when we judge historical characters, even Savarkar, when we judge him, you know, some somebody comes and says Savarkar's some of these views are sometimes very anti-Muslim, or Golwalkar, we should not shy away from them. But when we create the larger moral matrix, how do we judge him? Is my point. I think Savarkar passes the test. Netaji passes the test. Gandhi also passes the test. Churchill, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not saying he fails. I'm not saying he passes. I don't know. I've not thought about it. Hitler clearly fails. Aurangzeb fails. Akbar, I think there is a case for Akbar, for us being, not being so anti Akbar, in my view. Now, you can disagree with me. Tipu Sultan, I don't know. I'm really waiting on Vikram Sampat's work. It's going to be 2-3 years, but let's see when the work comes out. I'll take a call on Tipu Sultan then. I'm open. I'm open right now. And there are many such characters in history. You know, we should always have an open mind when we judge characters. Like, I try to do this when I do the Ramayana sessions. I've when I read Ramayana, and some kids had started having doubts about the religion, I told them, you don't need to dump the religion. Look at the entire text. There will always be verses that you have problems with if you look at it through the present lens of presentism. It doesn't mean you don't stop doing that. It just means those were the views of that time, outdated. I don't agree with them. The same thing applies to, you know, maybe the Quran also. You can take what you like in it and reject what you want. The problem is the Quran doesn't allow that. In the case of Hinduism, it is allowed. So you can reject the things. Well, that's the problem for Islamists and Muslims and the scholars over there to solve. That's not my problem. I don't care. So I'll now start looking at your questions. So again, somebody had sent a super chat. So I have not received any questions. So let me try and look whether they have sent me the question on Twitter. I don't know. I don't see any question. I don't see. Uh, mm, Let me see. No, I don't see. This is the thing. People send UPI donations and then they don't ask questions. I don't understand. So if you have a question, please do ask it. Okay. So let's see. So there were a few super chats. So let me go there. Let me go on the top. Mhm. You can ask your super chats. I will go on taking them. So Vivek, sorry, Vivek, thanks for becoming a member again. This is the most annoying thing. This YouTube thing that you have to rejoin again and again and again. So I have 3 questions already. So you can go on asking them. I'll answer them. Tricky talk. Thanks for joining. Okay, Siddhant. Is history a tool for truth telling, or is it a tool for nation building? Do we tell facts as they are, or we twist them a little for greater good? Romans destroyed Carthage and then wrote that they were baby eaters. I think, in my eyes, history is just the way of telling how things happened, the way they were. In my question, in my view, I think. But sometimes, I mean, there is those white lies, right? Where the classic moral scenario being, somebody enters your house, you are basically hiding a Jew, and you are in Nazi Germany, and you go there, and somebody approaches your room and says, "हाँ भाई, फलाना बंदा है अंदर." And if you're a Kantian, you would not lie, but like in that scenario, I would lie and I would protect that person. But do I do that in the case of history? I can't think of a scenario that this kind of an impact would be there. I really don't think so, honestly, in my view. Hmm. Anish, I think the problem isn't the judging, it's the conclusions drawn and actions taken. Example, Aurangzeb is no justification for hating modern Muslims. I agree. We don't need to hate modern Muslims for anything. But then we also don't need to blame modern Hindus for anything. The problem with this group association is that everybody seems to do this. Yeah, that's the problem, right? That's the problem. So okay. Mhm. How difficult is it going to be to judge present day public figures for future historians due to overload of information and misinformation? What a brilliant question, Aditya. Excellent question. I was thinking about it, and this was going to be my closing comments, but good that you asked this question. So these will not be my closing comments. So I'll speak now. So I was thinking about this, and boy, was I freaking confused, because just think about it. How are we going to judge Modi Or how are we going to judge Rahul Gandhi and all these people? Because there is so much information in the digital world that I don't know how these people are going to be judged. I guess, in the future, we're just going to have to live by this methodology where we'll have to say that these were the portals that used to talk about these people, and Falana was this, Falana was that, and these were the views of all these people, and we just don't know. It's going to be end there. Mm, You know, that's all I can say. But this is an excellent question. Like, I was thinking about it, like 100 years down the line, when people judge Modi, Amit Shah, and what are they going to call them? I don't know. I don't know. What are people going to call Rana Ayub? What are people going to call Audrey Truschke? What are people going to call Putin? I don't know. I really don't know. Mr. Lee, I don't see any questions, so I don't know. Okay. What is your view on algorithmic approaches to history or computational history? Are the historical patterns revealing laws of history similar to laws of physics? I don't think so. I think they're completely different. I think it depends on how you model your system. Like, the laws of physics are completely different, but the laws of history, like what laws? Laws are based on what you assume. So, what are you going to a priori assumptions going to be in your model itself when you draw the algorithm? They vary. So, how can you draw the parallel? I don't see any parallel. Soham Banerjee. भाई क्वेश्चन क्या है सोहम कैन यू टाइप योर क्वेश्चन आई डोंट नो व्हाट योर क्वेश्चन इज सो आई वुड अप्रिशिएट इफ यू टाइप योर क्वेश्चन I think the central contention is how we celebrate the legacy of past figures. A case can be made we dwell in over romanticism, celebrate the persona of a flawed being instead the deed one. Look, I have never understood this romanticism of the past. I Okay, I get it. There are historical figures in the past, like, okay, I'll learn from them and I'll move on, whether it's Shivaji and each and every person. Like, I'm on the pro Shivaji side, but still, beyond a point, my life doesn't revolve around it. We take inspiration from multiple stories and multiple people, but look, at the end of the day, are you 100% perfect as a human being? Are you, or am I? I don't think I am. I am also flawed. I have flaws. I have so many problems. So if I am not perfect, how the hell is the world, the world going to be? That doesn't mean anything goes. I'm not saying that, nor am I trying to say this. All I'm saying is that we need to be more mature. Is all I'm trying to say. Okay, so especially interested in how you think of characters like Raja Raja and Rajendra Chola, who are looked at as heroes and who are villains in places like Sri Lanka. That's in fact, you won't believe it, Soham. This is something that I had discussed with Arun when we discussed his book. Like, there are no good answers. I honestly think there are no good answers. I say this with all honesty. I'm not trying to wiggle out of your question here. Like, how do we model it? So think about it. So let's think out loud. Let's think together while we are doing this stream. So when I'm going to judge the histories of these two people, I mean, what happened? What are the historical parameters that we're going to judge them from, right? I mean, those were the eras where people would just invade each other. So did those Sri Lankan kings just pop out of nowhere, or they were just always there through hereditary extension? Did they ever not think of invading someone? If given the chance, would those kings and queens would not have invaded somebody else? I think they would have. And in that scenario and in that world, then really, do you think we can not say, Raja Raja or Rajendra Chola did just what that was the era. So we take the arguments we've learned today, like, that was the thing everybody did at that time. Kings would invade other kingdoms and make them theirs. That's what happened those times, may. That literally was the norm. Was there any case where a king invaded and said, nah, bus, अब मैं invade नहीं करूंगा, I give up, tata te bye bye? It did not happen. These things would not happen. I'm sorry, I keep looking at my phone because what if somebody has emailed me a super chat question through UPI? That's the only reason I looked there. Um, uh, so I don't know. I think I'm just thinking out loud. I have not, completely made my thoughts very clear. But if I was to judge by these characteristics that we discussed today, I'm not begrudging Sri Lankans for calling them a villain because they lost. We won in a way, but we won is what I'm trying to say. Should that happen today? No. It happened then. What do we do? Is my answer. If you don't agree with me, please write in the comments. I'll happily read that. Abhishek Ramakrishnan. Reservations has become a guilt by association tool where those who are not discriminatory are paying a price by experiencing different standards when there are better ways of making people acknowledge historical justice. I don't disagree with this. Reservations is a case of fixing a anomaly in society where there are clear measurable characteristics where people who have suffered over the last few years get a lift up. Now what are the benefits of, look, you have to understand, every time people give me those answers of Thomas Sowell, and I've read Thomas Sowell and he's a great scholar, but you have to understand African Americans are barely 11 to 13% of America. The other castes which were oppressed in India, SC STs, are 30%. It's a different scale we're talking altogether. I am being very open. I have never supported OBC reservation. I have always been for pre-mandal, not post-mandal. But I still stick my neck out and say SC STs deserve reservations. So this guilt by association logic, I'm sorry, Abhishek, I don't agree with you, or I have misunderstood you and I apologize. Mm. Your stance on free will and the Charvak and are Charvak narcissists? I don't know. I mean, every individual is more than just their ideology, first of all, Milan. So you should be more charitable. My stance on free will is very well known. I'm a compatibilist. Now I'm not going to sit here and explain compatibilism because I've literally done it so many times on the podcast. So you can just read compatibilism and you will understand. Read Dan Dennett, you will understand what compatibilism is. As per Mongolians, Genghis Khan was father of their nation, but West hate him. But the West love Alexander. The West view people from their prism. So there is a Eurocentric prism, but that doesn't mean that Genghis Khan was some modicum of awesomeness, right? What are you talking about? Is my question. What are you? Do you think we judge historical figures also inspired by religion? God versus Satan, Deva versus Asura. We have always a tendency to put them in a bracket. We treat humans and complex, not our idols. It's a very good observation, by the way. Religion is one of the tools how we see. You have to understand, religion initially, see, humans were there. They started increasing in numbers. They needed something to control themselves. They came up with religion. I know if you're a believer, you will not agree with my view, but this is the scientific view. Religion encoded what was happening in the society. Later on, religion became this thing, and now it refuses to change. And now society is behaving like the religion. It has become an ulti Ganga kind of a thing. First, it was Ganga was flowing, people recorded the Ganga, then they stopped the Ganga flow, and they're like, ab aise hi baho. That kind of a thing. So also you have to understand, we are category, we are like, our brain is designed to create categories. That's how we make sense of the world. We keep categorizing people: Deva, Asura, God, Satan, Kala, Gora, Nata, Lamba. That's how our brain made sense of the world. So we're always going to go on doing these absurd things, unfortunately. So, what is my criteria of pure evil? I agree Hitler falls, but curious to hear your reasoning. काफी नहीं था उसकी सोच कि उसने इतने सारे लोगों को मार दिया क्योंकि वो एक पर्टिकुलर टाइप के थे? मतलब और क्या रीजन चाहिए आपको? That's pure evil. Because you are inferior because of the color of your skin or some certain characters, you should be wiped off earth. That is pure unadulterated evil. Ay, ay, ay. That man is crazy. Where do you personally think Savarkar's rape atrocities comment fit in this discussion, technically and specifically? I'm not talking about whether we should follow these things, of course. Well, we had taken those comments with Vikram Sampath. We, I mean, I don't agree with those views, but again, I don't understand your question. I mean, we reject those views. Khatam. Are you saying that because of one bad view, Savarkar is totally cancelled? Then every single human being is cancelled. You are also cancelled, by the way. How are you going to be living then? My whole point is, how do you live then? Mm. Mm. Were the likes of Jyotu Basu and Periyar pure evil? No, I don't think so. Pure evil is Hitler. He is the champion. I think Hitler is the undisputed champion of the world. हिटलर को कोई नहीं बीट कर सकता. हिटलर का स्वैग हिटलर ही जाने. Mm, it is not for us to have absolute biasness when it comes to the individual who fought for our resolution. I don't know what this means. We can study them. That is a different issue. But how can we remove individuals who died for us? I don't understand what you're trying to say. So I don't know how to respond to it. Hmm. Mm. Do you think if Ravan had won, then he would have be worshipped now and Rama is cursed? That first of all, the underlying assumption is that literally, historically, Rama and Ravana were real characters. I don't know if they were real or not. They could have been. Um, First of all, I don't know if Ravana would have won. Yeah, maybe history would have looked at a different way, but I don't know. Mm. Reservations were right in spirit, but in practicality, also incentivize becoming an election plank. Can't get rid of them when they are redundant. Well, yeah, because your underlying assumption is that they will always be needed. My underlying assumption is not like yours. I believe in capitalism and free markets. I believe that once a society reaches a certain level of moral prosperity, we will start seeing options outside. Now, you might come back to me and say, Kushal, look at America. They're talking about this. Well, they're talking about that is because they never did those things. That's why they're talking about affirmative action or reservations or quotas today. In India's case, we did it from the beginning when we formed our republic. So when we become a prosperous nation, we will go into the ulta direction where we'll be like, okay, now maybe we don't need it. The mistake Americans did was they never did it. Is my whole point. I hope that answers your question. You can keep asking your super chats while I look at various comments, because I'll immediately get a pop up when a super chat comes. So you can go on asking them. I will immediately come and answer them. I am with you guys for another half an hour. Hmm. An upper caste Hindu, for no fault of his, has less number of seats in government institutions as opposed to lower caste Hindus. Discrimination in favor of low caste is negative discrimination against upper caste for historical injustice. It is, but that's how you look at it. I look at it as positive discrimination in favor of lower caste because of the historical injustice. It is just how you look at it. I don't look at it the way you do. I look at it as people who have been given such a bad number for 2000 years being given. It's like this. I always say, like, there is a race happening and you're like here in the race and this person is here, so I'm just saying, let us give this person a slight support so that that person can at least compete, is my whole point. That's what we need to do. Should we always limit figures to ideas? How can for X a Hindu universalist deal with this when sometimes as civilizations may need heroes which often lead to romanticism? Heroes are absolutely necessary. Some level of romanticism is always going to happen, whether we like it or not. But the point is that how much do we let that romanticism get to us? How seriously do we take this kind of romanticism is another point. uh, like with Shivaji, I like Shivaji. I've never made any bones about it. Like, I am a huge Shivaji fan, and I know what the later Peshwas did to, the SC/ST castes in India. They were made to wear spittoons with the Peshwai so that the spit doesn't touch the ground. These are historically recorded facts. So we all judge our people, but Shivaji did fight someone who I think Aurangzeb was a far bigger evil. I'm not saying Shivaji was an evil. He was a hero in any criteria because under Shivaji a lot of things were controlled. So I judge it like this: you need stories, man. You can't live without stories. If you don't have stories, what are you going to do? Human beings need stories to look up to. So you're never going to get rid of stories. Following up from the comment on the Cholas, what I was thinking is that we shouldn't judge historical characters at all before a particular time. Come on, Soham. So we shouldn't we shouldn't judge Aurangzeb then. We shouldn't judge Hitler then. Think about it. And what timeline do you want to draw then? Then you'll be like, just after Aurangzeb, we stop judging people. Then somebody will say, just after Hitler, we stop judging people. That's not fair, right? That's what I'm trying to say. We're gonna judge everyone and live with it. I'll tell you, this whole thing on Rajputs versus Marathas always happens on Twitter. I don't know how many of you know that. They always are fighting amongst each other. It's I just sit and take popcorn and laugh. I'm like, oh, you muppets. The point is, we're always going to have these fights. There is, even within the boundaries of India, there is an emic and etic of multiple varieties. Indian history written by Ensert is the etic. Within that there are emic views. There will be the Rajput view, there will be the Maratha view, there will be some Bhumiyar history view, there will be some Thakur history view, there will be some Khatri history view. What are you going to do? How many things are you going to accommodate? We're never going to have a perfect system. I gave you some of the primers in today's monologue where we can work towards it. There's no perfect system in this, it's so complex. Will you be covering Canadian vaccine mandate protest in a monologue with or with? I don't know. I'm not giving it a thought. Mm. Is Shivaji versus Aurangzeb one of the rarest cases of good versus evil in reality? Not really. There are many cases. Brijesh, do we separate historical persons versus their action, focus more on their acts? I feel person centric discussions is distraction, like Gandhi and his ahimsa, and political acts should be focused. I don't know. So what you're saying is that we don't tell people who was the historical person who committed a particular act, and we just talk about acts. Are you saying that? I don't want to misunderstand you. So I'm trying to understand what you're saying. So in that case, X number of Jews were murdered. It doesn't matter who murdered them. It does, right? Hitler murdered them. Uh, Aurangzeb butchered Hindus. Do we judge Aurangzeb or we not judge Aurangzeb? Do we take his name out of the picture? I don't get it. Look, or are you trying to say, because I'm trying to be charitable to your view, are you trying to say the absolute cases like Hitler and Aurangzeb, we take their names, but in many other way cases where it's slightly complex, we don't take the names? I don't know. So your way of thinking is misplaced as you want to bring lower caste to the same starting point, but affirmative action is predetermining the finish line without giving the lower caste an option to choose what they want to do. Well, they were not given an option to choose what they want to do for bloody 2000 years. And even today they don't in many cases in India, where they are not even allowed to jump on a horse to do their wedding, where they are made to drink urine. So please don't say this. Stop assuming for surveys after surveys say they want affirmative action. So if you're saying I'm assuming on behalf, no, I'm going by the surveys. They want affirmative action. Are you going to deny that too now? There are surveys that say yes, they want affirmative action. Mm, should the families of those who were affected by the Bengal famine ask for reparations from the UK? They can ask. मिलना तो कुछ है नहीं, तो ट्राई कर लो. वो कोई नूर नहीं देने वाले, बाकी सब तो छोड़ दो यार. अभी ट्राई करने में कोई हर्ज नहीं है वैसे. See, I've dealt with this answer many times, this whole economic argument. So what are you going to baseline it at, right? What is the economic level that you're going to base? Like, I had once looked at the income being 5,000 per person, and then I realized इतने high number of Indians को मिल जाएगा कि सत्यानाशी हो जाने वाला. Look, there are multiple factors. It's not just income. There are multiple factors. Yes, if you come and tell me, like, if a person has gotten two generations of benefits out of reservation, it has clearly helped them move out of the financial ladder, then maybe the third generation or the fourth generation should not opt for it, considering certain characters, finances, etc., etc. Maybe. I don't know the answers, but I certainly don't buy this argument at all. And I'm not, I am clearly in the pro reservations camp. Mm. Don't you think our institutions have lost credibility? What institution? I don't get. Like, what institutions are we talking about? It's such a vague question. I can't answer it. Mm, temple, universities, and police. Mm, temples are useless according to you? I don't know. Universities are a work in progress. Mm, um, police is a work in progress. The police problem is different. I think we need more police in India. Their problem is different, and there are so many reports given by so many committees, but no government wants to do it. Even the Supreme Court has done. ASI is a useless institution. No, they are an institution that unfortunately has no money. That is the problem. Mm, insert is another institution. I don't know. Suppose incarnation is true, but it's not, most probably. So I don't bother about these things. Mm, 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 mm. Look, as far as the SC/ST Atrocities Act is concerned, I think it is too draconian. So my view over there is also different. I think it's too draconian. I think it should not be that draconian. I just disagree with you. It is not a law and order problem. So yeah, I will do the monologue on decoloniality. In fact, it was supposed to be this one today, but then this thing popped up, and I was like, let me talk about this. And then, uh, so what are my views on postmodernism? Very common, yeah. Just go and check any previous monologue. I have spoken so many times. I'm not going to repeat myself over here. Mm, your opinion on current trucker situation in Canada? कुछ नहीं, बैठो पॉपकॉर्न देखो और मजे करो. अभी इतनी बड़ी-बड़ी बातें हो गई थी, जस्टिन ट्रूडो भाग गया है, छुप गया है. क्या भाग गया, छुप गया है? He has just tweeted, "I tested positive for COVID-19. I'm feeling fine." So just he's just isolating because he has COVID हुआ. So सबका पोपट हो गया. Any chances of future podcast with JSD? Depends on him, man, not me. We are not. We've not spoken now for almost a year, so I don't know. I don't know. I have nothing against him. I just disagree with his worldview. That's all. How can any law be based on anything like that? Obviously, you're not going to base the law on that's ridiculous. You start making laws on the basis of freaking past karma. What the hell? Obviously, I know you're not saying that, but I'm just saying. I'm just thinking, oh my god, if they start making laws like this, what kind of a hellhole India would be? ये freaking laws are made on basis of past birth. अला सुसाइड ही कर ले आदमी past birth के ऊपर laws बनने वाले हैं. Oh my god, you just scared the shit out of me. What are your agreements, disagreements, especially when it comes to with India? That is Bharat. I will share my monologue. You will find out. Mm. Has anybody sent a question here? Nope. Okay, let me go up. You can ask your chats questions. I am just going up in the chat, seeing if there is any question there. Mm. Abhishek, that was the whole point, right? You've asked what is the resolution of for moral relativism in this framework. I feel we end up falling in the same trap. We do, which is the whole point. I read those entire steps that were recommended in the paper by Charles Kahn. I think those are robust recommendations, and because I thought about this, because I am not a relativist, right? So yeah, can't wait for the day our grandkids will shit on us for eating red meat and treating machines like shit once they became sentient. Yeah. Look, I think in another 50 years, when mock meat or lab meat or whatever this is going to be the norm, um, oh my goodness, the next generations are going to judge us like big time. But then you will have to tell them the same thing. We did not have lab meat, but if after lab meat existed, and it was clearly proven that is 100% safe and it has lesser of a carbon imprint, and you still choose to eat uh, animal meat, whatever, then history should judge you more, is the point, right? Mm. Can India have an honest political discussion about the current Westminster system and about the possibility of future presidential system? Already happening everywhere. Shashi Tharoor has discussed this. It happens so many times. So many people have this. Mm, I don't see many questions now. You can ask your super chats, but if I don't see any questions, then I guess I'll wrap it up. Mm, mm, uh, Let me see. Mm, hmm. The way you look at your past defines your present and lays base for your future. Yeah, it does. Mm, I don't see any questions. Super. What are your thoughts on the Indian Constitution based on Mimamsa? Think either Swami or some Supreme Court made. You can't have one ideology making the whole constitution. That would be such a restricted worldview. I would not want that. Mm, mm. It's a mosquito is bugging me. I think it's time to go. Do you think India needs a more robust anthropological approach towards societal problems in India, and maybe we can then develop our institutions again? Yeah, we do. But then those are Western constructs apparently for people who believe in decoloniality. So अभी क्या करें? उसको solve करो. Self-driving is an interesting experiment. If 95% of America vehicles are self-driving, are 5% human drivers more liable for endangering others? Can society force them to switch? Very good question. You have just put the vaccine thing and flipped it around on self-driving. I think the case of self-driving would be that we might clearly be in a situation where we will not allow it to happen over the period of time, but then people will like, I want my freedom to drive my own car, I don't want a robot driving it, and then they will create separate highways for those people, private highways in America, where self-driving will be allowed. I think that is the thing, in my view. Mm, No, I did not say that. First of all, this a priori assumption is flawed that Brahmins are vegetarian. Brahmin, not all Brahmin. And the second assumption is that all other castes are non-vegetarian. These are all flawed a priori assumptions. Vegetarianism by itself can be judged by arguments which are based on carbon emissions and stuff like that. You may not like those arguments, and that's your problem, not mine. I did not say, nor did I make a statement that vegetarians today are more moral than non-vegetarians today, because that is not the sole moral framework. You could be a vegetarian and be a child molester. Who's the better person? A non-vegetarian who's a decent human being. So these are your assumptions, not mine. So stop alluding and attributing motives to me, which I don't do. I'm not going to fall for your traps or your bullshit. For the record, I'm not a vegetarian. Mm, let's see. Mm, okay, I don't see any questions. So I think I've answered all your questions. I have covered as much as I wanted to. Is there anything? No. Let me check my cell phone. Are there any super chat questions here? Nope. None over here either. So let me check the YouTube page again. No, I don't see anything here too. Uh, yep. I think. Uh, yeah, I think I've covered everything. So once again, guys, I want to repeat the name of the paper that I used as the framework. The name of the paper was Thinking About Historical Legacies, Looking for Just Principles and Processes by Charles R. Kahn. I will share the page again. I would highly recommend all of you uh, to go and read this paper. Mm, this is the paper. It's very interesting. Someone says government shouldn't have banned beef. I think it should be left to the states. Those states that want to consume beef should be allowed to, in my view. I agree. All right. So once again, thanks for all the interesting questions. I tried my best to answer them. Um, as far as the podcast is concerned, look, uh, my aim is to give you different perspectives. When I started today's podcast, I clearly said, my personal view is not very firm on this issue. I myself am developing my views on this. On some things, my views are far more sure and developed, but on this issue, they're not. So, as far as I'm concerned, um, have an open mind when it comes to judging historical figures. Have an open mind when you look at people and historical people. Yes, there are some there are some people where, or some issues where the answer is very clear, like in the case of Aurangzeb or in the case of Hitler. I think the answer is very clear. But I don't believe Churchill falls in that category personally. I may not like him personally, but I don't think so he falls in that category if we do try to have an honest conversation. There are many things that he has done that have had positive effects too. As far as I'm concerned, we should try to learn. My whole aim is that if today, the first hour when I read all those quotes and I made those comments, I could have done my comments and just use the essence of those quotes, but I just think it's more intellectually honest when I just read out things that people have said and give you examples to make your analysis. You can do your analysis about, you know, I think the greatest service Vikram Sampath has done is given us another perspective on Savarkar. There is a left wing perspective. Now there is a Savarkar pro perspective in Dhananjay Keer, and then there is the Sampath perspective, which is somewhere in between. He's just said what was said, and now you can make a judgment on Savarkar. Similarly, you can make a judgment on every Indian hero, whether it's Gandhi or someone else. So judge them, do your own thing, and think about it. And always have an open mind. Keep on expanding your views. Keep on expanding and changing your views when the evidence changes. Because if you don't, then you're just attached to bad ideas and you're just into groupthink. You'll not grow as a person. Also, if you like what I do here, support the podcast. I know many people have become members today. Some have subscribed on Patreon too. That's how I go. Vice podcast is not run on any outside support. It is a completely, crowd driven podcast. So as long as you support me, I survive. It's as simple as that. So keep doing that. I'll go on bringing different ideas, different concepts to you. Tomorrow we'll cover the budget once it's done afterwards. And on that note, I'll leave you guys. You know, stay happy, always have an open mind. And if something I've said has offended you, too bad. Bye.